All right. Thank you very much, Truth Guardians, for coming to see us again. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you for doing all the things that you're doing, like clicking the like button and sharing this with your friends so that they can subscribe to the YouTube channel. And also, you'll be seeing us on locals.com here this weekend. And today, again, I have my favorite doctor, Dr. Dennis Garvin. And today we're going to talk a little bit about masks and public policy as it relates to the COVID pandemic. And the first thing I'd like to show you is a CDC video, because we're going to kind of come from the perspective that a lot of people in the country believe that masks are effective, and that there's more of a backlash on people who don't wear masks. So we're going to get into all that. And some of the contradictions that we've seen over time since we've learned of the coronavirus early last year. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show this video, and then we'll get Dr. Dennis to give us his opinion on what he's hearing. This is directly from a CDC video.
I wear a mask because
I wear a mask because I care about the health and well-being of those around me.
I wear a mask because I might not know that I'm sick.
yo uso una máscara para mi familia y la comunidad.
I wear a mask because I want to keep others safe.
I wear a mask because I want to protect everybody.
I wear a mask because too many people who look like me are getting sick and dying from COVID-19.
I've grown fond of seeing people smile with their eyes. It's a beautiful experience in these times.
Do it for their futures.
Even if you don't have to, I hope you choose to.
I wear a mask because I really want to get a haircut soon.
First thoughts, Dr. Dennis?
The first thought is that this is an indication that people have essentially absorbed the message. It's almost like a vaccine in itself. When you put enough information out there, people basically form an internal opinion based on that. So it's like the way the vaccine works. The one thing about this, the common message in all of those statements was these people were doing it for someone else. Mm-hmm. This was a message designed to be to suggest that wearing a mask is altruistic, and the subtext is that failure to wear the masks should induce both fear and guilt.
Right. Okay. Now, you said that it was kind of like a vaccine. When I think of vaccines, I think of goodness. I think of, okay, maybe we're going to be able to suppress the effects of the virus. Are masks good? Are those people actually doing something good for the people that they're interacting with every day, or is there a downside to that?
The possibility is that it helps. And the main reason is we talk about airborne pathogens, bacteria, viruses that get to you by an aerosolized method. Somebody breathes the bacteria or virus into the air and you inhale it, and that's how you become inoculated from that person. So logic would dictate that one barrier would be good, and if one is good, two are better. So a barrier on the mask of the person with the COVID helps protect the person that does not have it, and the mask on the person who does not have it doubles up their protection. That's the theory, and I have no problem with it in theory. As far as the scientific data behind it, when it was first implemented, there wasn't any scientific data. It just made sense. And again, I have no problem with doing something that makes sense on the face of it. I am concerned about those things that happened subsequently, because there are some considerations that should be made and unfortunately are either not being made or being made in I guess, small volume communication. It's not getting out there in the major media.
Okay, and that's what we want to talk today. But I want to ask a couple questions first. We do have some information from the Asian countries. They seem to have. You never saw anybody with a mask in the United States or in Europe. Okay, maybe Eastern Europe, and then in Asia, when people were sick, it seemed they would wear a mask. So you would see you'd see a picture of people on a subway, and one or two people would have a mask on.
Right.
I always assumed that was to help them protect other people because they may have a cold or something like that. So
right.
that's
either that or they were either that or
let me ask both questions and I'll let you respond. So that's one thing we've always learned. The other thing we've learned is that when we sneeze, when I grew up, you were supposed to sneeze in your hand, okay? And then, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, they said that's not smart because if you sneeze in your hand, a little kid sneezes in their hand, then it's all over the toys in the nursery and everything else. And we've been told to do this now, okay? This is the new thing. I don't know why doctors, when I was growing up, didn't think, well, cover your mouth, but don't cover your mouth with your hand. So I'm already skeptical of your profession. Okay. And I'll give you a third one that just popped to my mind, and then you can roll all this into what you want to say today. I never saw a doctor walk into an examination room when I was in it or my kids were in it with a mask on. Never. So either they were all healthy, or we never even considered putting a mask on doctors or people who are walking into a doctor's office where most of the people are ill, wearing masks. So where did all this come from? And then start to tell me a little bit about the downside of masks, because I think we can all agree, if I sneeze this way and I'm in a bus full of people, I'm going to be spewing my infectious droplets. If I do this, that's probably better.
Right.
Okay. All right. Now I'll shut up and you go.
First of all, as far as the Asian countries, you are correct. In Japan and places like that, it was not unusual to see people wearing a mask in public, walking down the street, or in public transportation. I suspect that this had two purposes. Yes, if a person had a cold or flu, it was simply polite on their part to cover themselves up. I think, however, there were also people who had risk conditions like asthma or bronchitis or cystic fibrosis or something that made them want to protect themselves. In those cases, before the flu, before COVID, the mask made sense for the reasons that we have attempted to harness that preventive capability. And yes, you're right. Prior to this, we really had no concern about airborne viruses, except for the Spanish flu back around the time of World War I. From that time to this, we really haven't had, except when SARS and MERS came out and now COVID, the annual flu was something where we just tolerated it. And no, I would wear a mask as a surgeon because I was trying to protect the patient. And no, we didn't wear them in exam rooms. Now, of course, we do, along with the face shield, for the dual reasons of protect the patient and protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. The idea about sneezing into your hand, yes, it is a bad idea. And what you showed was this, which is now known among the kids as a Dracula sneeze.
Okay.
All right. Because it's Bela Lugosi. Okay. Yeah.
That's cool.
So the Dracula sneeze does keep it from getting on your hands. And we do know that the COVID and the flu do survive on flat surfaces like your tabletop and your books and whatnot, and also on your hands. And that actually comes into a very good point, because now we're talking about the masks. Now, early on, both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Jerome Adams, the Surgeon General at the time, are online. They're on interviews as saying that they did not believe that masks were necessary. And I believe that they had some very valid points. First is that for something, for example, like an N95 mask, you actually had to be measured and fitted for it, and you had to have complete control here, almost like a flange or a gasket, so that the air could not escape and couldn't come in from the outside. The air was only going in and out through the actual filters themselves. The second point they made, which was excellent, was if you've got the COVID on your hands, these people are constantly fiddling with their masks, and they may actually be inoculating the mask with a virus that was on their hands but didn't get into their mouth until they began to breathe it.
Right.
The other and more sinister problem that we see now is if a person does have COVID, we know that it multiplies in the mouth and the nose. That is why these people come in initially with fever, stuffy nose, and sore throat, because that's where the virus is replicating. And if you have a mask on, you're breathing it out and breathing back in. And this is something we call auto-reinoculation. And that's something that has actually been mentioned in the January issue of the American Medical Journal, that the concern now is that if a person has the COVID in their mouth or nose and they're wearing a mask, they're actually increasing the viral load and making themselves sick. So if they test positive for COVID, the advice now is to quarantine yourself in your house without a mask, preferably window open, and then the people in the house should be wearing a mask to protect them. The other problem that I have, Dale, with the masks is that they're being reused.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and people are getting pollens, allergens, dirt. They are messing with the inside of the mask when they put it on. And so if they've got the virus on their hands, they're actually making it worse. So I would have to say this, that for a preventative standpoint, wearing a mask is good for a healthy person that wants to avoid getting the virus if they use a new mask every time and they don't keep fiddling with it. That is almost impossible.
Right.
As far as a person who already has the virus, I believe that it has been shown in the American Medical Journal with doctors contributing to this from many of the major medical centers in the United States, not the NIH, not the CDC. These people are saying that a person with the COVID is probably making themselves worse by continuing to wear a mask. They need to get away from the public where they don't have to worry about giving it to people, get into their house and get the mask off.
Okay. All right. So for the listeners, we're going to include both links in the description. So we're always going to try to find our sources and put them in the description so you can go back and watch what we're talking about. So both of those will be in the description that Dr. Dennis talked about right there. So to kind of end the mask discussion, I've got a couple questions, okay, and quick answers if you would.
Sure.
The first one is asymptomatic people wearing masks. Okay, so one of the suggestions was that the reason you wear a mask is that you don't know that you're shedding the virus because you're asymptomatic. If I'm asymptomatic and I'm wearing a mask, does that increase my chance of having an adverse effect from that virus? Or am I asymptomatic and I'm always going to be asymptomatic? So if let's say I just got the virus, because I have a huge problem with the fact that, we do all these tests, and one of the things that you and I are going to talk about is the effectiveness of testing and whether we should be trusting the testing, because my attitude is, I could be there's a time period when I'm negative for the virus, and then there's a period in time when I become positive for the virus. Okay, same with masks. Okay, if I'm wearing a mask and I'm healthy, maybe the mask is helping me. If I just contracted the virus, am I reproducing the virus in my nose and throat at a greater level because I'm wearing a mask?
Well, it's a good question. Unfortunately, that particular one is not answerable in the fact that we don't know if a person wearing a mask has the COVID until they either test positive because they're in an at-risk group or until they develop symptoms. Right. We do have a huge, huge number of asymptomatic people that are being tested routinely in professional athletes, in the bubble during the NBA, in football, and for example, Coach Nick Saban at Alabama tested positive, and he was sequestered and not allowed to be with his team during the Georgia game. And then he subsequently tested negative on 2 occasions, and he never developed any symptoms. And most of these athletes who are being held out, like Ohio State, had several athletes in the college playoffs that could not play because they tested positive. An extremely small percentage of these people went on to develop symptoms, and I know of nobody in this athletic group that went on to die as a consequence. Right. The problem is that is a highly select group and does not represent the broad spectrum of Americans, which includes younger than those guys, older than those guys, elderly, comorbidities and whatnot. So the testing, unfortunately, does have false positives. And that has been shown to be the case, and it has to do with how you do what's called the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction test.
Let's hold that, because I think that's going to be a whole show. The whole testing. I think
that makes it unreliable. Yeah, it makes it unreliable.
Okay, so here's our transition question. So I am also, because I'm a psychologist, not a licensed one, but I have a degree in psychology. I'm worried about the fact that people are walking around like this, and I can't see their face.
Yes.
And some people can't even understand their language because they're doing more lip reading than they think they are because their hearing is not very good. I think there are huge numbers of unintended consequences. So a yes or no question: do you think that we're going to be wearing masks at least during flu season for the rest of existence, or is this a something that is just going to be once we all get vaccinated and we forget about the COVID and it just becomes another part of the flu vaccination in the fall? Do we go back to showing everybody our full faces and our full emotions, or do we wear masks for the rest of existence in the United States? Yes or no? What's your guess?
I think that they're going to continue to market the idea of be afraid of this particular virus. And I think that every viral risk season, yes, I think people are going to be masking up.
Okay, good. I love the word marketing. When you said they're going to be marketing this, we'll have to pursue that whole thing, because there's a whole bunch of people that are making a whole bunch of money off the COVID, and I'm just wondering how long it's going to take for them to take all that marketing and repackage it into something else, so that we're, every time I got to remember my keys, my wallet, my phone, and my mask.
Mm-hmm.
For the rest of existence. Okay, so so one of the things we'll include in the description is this whole idea that science or intent changes. So we talked about Jerome Adams and Dr. Fauci talking about masks are not terribly effective, don't wear a mask, back in March of 2020. And I think at least part of their intent was, although I think they should have just came out and said it. We don't want you to wear masks because there aren't enough masks, and we're trying to find them, and everybody's trying to find them, and China is buying up most of the supply. So there was a problem with the supply of masks. So I think that's part of it. But then they said, well, the science changed, and now we believe that masks are effective in all this. And it seems like we've had lots and lots of stops and starts, and one person saying one thing and then the next day somebody contradicting them. And you and I had talked in our first session about the fact that nobody seemed to have really done a cost benefit analysis on this. And they said, okay, well, let's shut down the country to slow the spread, to keep the levels of hospitalization below what we had in supply. Okay. But I never really heard anyone talk about the cost part of this thing. Okay, and you talked a little bit about it last time. I'd like you to kind of expand upon that. What are the costs of all these things we're doing? Okay, now we know that my son is in the restaurant business, and there's about 40% of the restaurant business in the country that may never come back, that is just to the point where they're either going to go bankrupt, or his restaurant had to close in Richmond because they didn't have enough volume to be able to support the business. So when the policymakers made these decisions, why do you think they decided to only talk about the benefits of these lockdowns and masks and social distancing and all these other things without helping us understand the cost of these things, which is really where a lot of the emotion comes from folks? Well, how do you think those policy decisions were being made?
I wish I knew. Quite frankly, I am concerned as a physician, and I believe that you and I have spoken offline about this in the past, that as a physician, if I prescribe a medication or a treatment for a patient, I am accountable to that patient ethically to provide them with all of the potential downsides, and then they make a decision based on that.
Right.
This bureaucratic medicine takes credit for any success, and there hasn't been any success lately, but the one thing they aren't going to do is be responsible for the consequences, and the consequences include increased risk of suicide, domestic violence, the education system, and the economic impact. They're not being held accountable for that because there is no legal way that they can be held as accountable as actual doctors. So these are basically, if you will, they're bureau doctors. And I don't discount the fact that they're doing this out of fear and that they sincerely believe it. But to me, again, it's a little bit like burning down the house to get rid of the mice. Yeah, you've accomplished something, you've saved lives, but you've ruined the economy. And just for an example, we know that a great many cases of children needing glasses are discovered by the school teacher when they see the kid can't see the blackboard, or hearing difficulties when the kid can't hear what everybody else can hear on a comparative basis. Also, child physical abuse because the teacher sees the bruising. With the online classes now, you are essentially taking that out of the way. We have not yet, and probably will not for a long time, see the suicide statistics for 2020 on a comparative basis to, say, 2018. These are the unintended consequences, and the economy has yet to truly reflect. I don't understand it. I'm not an economist. But you yourself, in your family, you have seen the downturn. And unfortunately, when you're talking about the restaurant business, the only ones that are able to survive in this are the ones that provide fast food. And fast food is probably the most harmful thing in the world, specifically for prevention of COVID, because of the pro-inflammatory characteristics of fried foods, red meat, and refined carbohydrates.
Right.
So the very things that they tell people with psoriasis and lupus to avoid are those things that are the most prevalent in our society. So it's to shut down restaurants where a person could get a safe meal, or at least has the option of ordering one. There are very few safe things on the menu of these fast food restaurants.
Right. Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head, and it's I'll have to do some more thinking on it, is that it's the accountability. And I love the example that you gave of the doctor saying, we're going to do this medication, or we're going to do this surgery. And here are all the possible ill effects that could happen, and you have to go through all that consent stuff where you have to say, we believe this is going to help you, but it's also been shown to hurt people in these ways. Or I'm going to go in and do a surgery, and there's a chance that I might nick a nerve or something. You have to actually tell people that.
Yes.
Which the politicians don't have to.
Right.
And they can say whatever they want to say. Even Dr. Fauci, he's not held to the accountability of what he said in March as it relates to what he said during the summer, with the exception of the media pointing it out. Okay. Or maybe he loses his job. People could lose their job because they said, you said this in March, and then we found out that in June you were wrong. There has to be some consequences. There were always consequences in my life as a business person. But they don't have the same accountability as a doctor who's really trying to help that person. to be able to go back. And part of this, and we can talk about this at a later time, but some of this is the media. Okay, I've heard very, very few stories. I'm going to include one link in our description of something that I heard probably during the summer, where a person, a public policy doctor, started to do some research on how many people died in relation to how many people died with COVID. People who died from the they call it the death of despair, which is, I've lost my job, I've lost my family, I might be beating my kids, I'm going to commit suicide, just because of the lockdowns and all of the fear that's been instituted by the communicators in our government and in health professions, really. But he came up with a number that was double the number of people who had died from COVID at that particular time. Okay.
Yeah.
Where's the research on all that? Where is the media? And I think that's what you're speaking to. You have to take responsibility as a doctor, but all this communication that we hear from politicians and from, you know, the CDC and the NIH, they're not really being held accountable for it. And the media is not going after a lot of these stories. So as we close this out, just talk a little bit about where do you think we go next in our conversation about trying to pull the threads on these things so that people will understand better how to help themselves through this this vaccine portion and the testing and everything else. Where do we go with this, Dr. Dennis, in trying to help the people that are watching us better deal with this flawed communication that we're getting?
I think that, first of all, we need to understand and take with a grain of salt anything that the media says, because back years ago, when you and I were children, the old phrase from Madison Avenue is sex sells. And that was why you always saw the used car commercials with a girl with a bikini and an alluring look. And the subliminal message was, if you're a guy and you buy that car, you'll get that girl. And if you're a woman and you buy that car, you'll become that girl. Right. We've now learned, and the media has learned, that fear sells far better. That's why if you watch the Weather Channel, they've got reds and yellows. They've got the fright colors for all of their stuff. They talk about tornadic activity, which didn't exist before. They've now named winter storms, and they keep you just a little bit scared so that you'll stay tuned and watch their advertising. Mm-hmm. The same thing happens with the news outlets. Their job is not to inform. It is to, they are not in the business. Their business, their primary mission is making money. Mm-hmm. And the way they make money is by providing information in a way that keeps people tuned in, and fear is subliminal. It's always there. So we have very little in the way of reassurance, and that's why they're not about to give those numbers that you mentioned. What percentage of people that test positive actually get sick, and then break it down by the numbers, because we still know that those people dying are they're elderly, they have the comorbidities of obesity and kidney disease, lung disease, heart disease, hypertension, poor control of those illnesses. And so if it's almost a Darwin dream when we talk about survival of the fittest. It's interesting that most of these people that are the Darwin survival of the fittest are not saying that this is a good thing. They're as scared as everybody else because it was an abstraction, and now it's right there in their face.
Right.
So it's, to me, how can we help ourselves? Well, as we mentioned before, we had that, and people can look at the previous YouTube about the mouthwash, the zinc, the aspirin, etc. One thing I would add to that is the avoidance of the pro-inflammatory foods, like I mentioned, the fried foods, the red meat, the refined sugars, and you can go online and look at all of that stuff. That is something that has been found to reduce the inflammatory response in lupus and psoriasis. And we do believe now that it is the body's inflammatory hyperimmune reaction to the virus that produces a cytokine storm, and that is the greatest injury to the lungs. And we see that because the ICU doctors I've spoken with say that steroids, which suppress the immune system, is about the only thing that really works for these people in the later stages.
Right, right.
So
Excellent.
the pro-inflammatory food, I would add to what we previously said.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap all that together in an episode, you and I, because I think that's going forward. I think we're going to try to get people to understand that a lot of what they're hearing is not for their best benefit. There's some ulterior motive or some other intent, but there are common sense things that are out there from the scientific community that they can hang their hat on, because I think that's where people are getting really, really confused. And there's a lot of other topics I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about the testing issue. You know, every time I go into the Y, they stick the thermometer on my head and they say, okay, you're good to go. And I walk in there thinking, I don't know, I could have COVID right now. I could be spitting virus all over everybody. I don't, you know, but we have to do those things almost to allay the fear that the fear is what's causing a lot of this stuff. And I'm worried about people just kind of accepting everything that they're being told and losing their agency to be able to say, I know what's best for me because my doctor's helping me understand this. So we're going to have to lay all that stuff down. So we've got testing, we've got how do you keep yourself healthy. You're going to help me lose the 50 pounds that I need to lose so that I don't have that comorbidity. And we're going to talk, of course, a lot more about what are the long-term consequences for this stuff. Because as soon as they close the schools with all the information about the fact that when kids go to school, they're not spreading it to each other, and in most cases, they're not bringing it home either. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, those kids have lost a year of school.
Yes.
Because I went through the transition from classroom learning to online, asynchronous and synchronous online learning, and it's never going to be as good.
No.
You and I sitting together doing this interview in my studio would be so much better for the viewer than what we're doing now. Just multiply that by about 100 times with our kids, and put a kid in front of a laptop, and you've lost them. We're hurting kids like we don't even understand. And unfortunately, nobody's trying to figure it out. So you and I are going to try to figure it out, and we're going to pass that information along to our viewers. And again, I thank you so much. Thank you for your logic and your common sense and all your years of learning and knowledge and practical taking care of people. So we appreciate that.
My pleasure. It's good to talk with you. God bless, Dale.
God bless you. Take care.
You as well.